Hello, this is Carpe Omne, and I'm going to do a philosophical examination of the flying spaghetti monster. Let's start this off with an example. Let's say you walk into a room where you find a man and a table. The man tells you that there's an alien underneath the table. Hearing this, you look under the table and don't see anything. You go up to the man and say, "Excuse me, I don't see any alien underneath that table. What's up?" He says, "Oh, the alien's invisible. You can't see him." So, being a good skeptic, you put your arms underneath the table and wave them around a lot. And then you turn to the man and say, "Look, I just waved my arms around underneath that table, and they didn't touch anything." The man says, "Oh, well, the alien's really small and really fast, so he was just dodging your arms while you were moving them." Well, again, you're a skeptic. You're not going to believe anything just on his word. You have to prove it somehow. So what do? You take a cardboard box and you put it underneath the table and say, "Look, there's no way he can move around that, so the cardboard box isn't touching anything. There's nothing there." But the man says, "Oh, well, the alien can pass right through cardboard." You very quickly realize that this man is probably just making things up, and that he's probably just making excuses for why your tests aren't working. So how do you prove that there is no alien underneath that table? Well, this is what you do. You take another table and say, "Alright, here's a table that we know has no alien underneath it. What's the difference between these two tables?" If he can't point to a difference between the two tables, then you caught him. Because if there is no perceivable difference between the two tables, there's no way of telling if there's an alien underneath them. At that point, you can dismiss his position as being completely ridiculous because he has no proof or no evidence. Now, you might ask how this relates to the flying spaghetti monster. I'm sure many of you have come across cases where a religious belief or the religion itself is set up in a way similar to the alien underneath the table, where no matter what reasoning you use against it, there's always an excuse. Sometimes absurd excuses, but there's always an excuse. So if we look at various excuses for religious practices, religious beliefs, or the religion itself, we find that they match up almost perfectly with the flying spaghetti monster. So the first philosophical implication of the flying spaghetti monster is that it operates similar to the table that you bring in that you know does not have an alien underneath it. The person defending their beliefs has to say, "Alright, my beliefs are demonstrably different from the flying spaghetti monster in these ways." And until they do that, we can dismiss those beliefs, we can dismiss those practices, just as easily as we can dismiss the existence of a flying spaghetti monster. So let's look at this. If you don't believe in God, people will tell you you're going to go to hell. But if you don't believe in the flying spaghetti monster and he does exist, you're going to go to an afterlife with stale beer and strippers infected with STDs. So Pascal's wager applies to both those religious beliefs and the flying spaghetti monster. Why doesn't God reveal himself to the entire world to let everyone know that he exists? Well, he doesn't want to take away your free will. Why doesn't the flying spaghetti monster do the same thing? Well, he likes messing with you. Why is this world so chock full of evil and suffering? Well, most religions will say that their God works in mysterious ways. The flying spaghetti monster allows for evil and suffering because he made the universe when he was drunk. So you can't expect a perfect creation out of a drunk deity. We can take this even further. We can look at almost every argument for the existence of a God and apply this same argument to the flying spaghetti monster. First cause? No, the first cause could be either God or the flying spaghetti monster. First mover? Well, that fits the flying spaghetti monster perfectly. The ontological argument? Well, the flying spaghetti monster is the being for which there can be no greater. So the ontological argument applies to him too. You can argue from scripture all you want, but the flying spaghetti monster has his own book called The Gospel of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Not only that, but if you really look into things, you'll find that the flying spaghetti monster actually explains things better than most religions do. For instance, if you're to argue from the design argument, well, there's several things wrong with the human body that the design argument has trouble accounting for if you have a perfect God designing us. One thing is the optic nerve leaving the eye right at the back, giving each human a blind spot. The design argument doesn't account for this because Supposedly, the designer is supposed to be intelligent. However, the flying spaghetti monster accounts for this because, if you remember, he was drunk when he made the universe, so you can't expect it to be perfect. This leads us into the second philosophical implication of the flying spaghetti monster. Now, if you're trying to prove that something exists, and you put forth an argument in favor of its existence, one way of telling whether that argument is valid or not is to look at it and say, alright, can this prove the existence of something that does not exist? If we look at some of the arguments for the existence of a God, we can see that the flying spaghetti monster fits them perfectly. And we know with relative certainty that the flying spaghetti monster actually does not exist. So if an argument for the existence of God can prove something that does not exist, then we know the argument is invalid. A third and final implication of the flying spaghetti monster, although this isn't a philosophical one for the most part, is that it's just really, really funny, in my opinion. I mean, seriously. A floating ball of spaghetti creating the universe? That's ridiculous. That is completely ridiculous. And the same goes for Russell's Teapot and the Invisible Pink Unicorn. Both very hilarious examples of religious satire, and both are very important philosophically in terms of religion.
It is I, the flying spaghetti monster.
Oh my gosh, your noodliness. I have so many questions to ask of you.
Too bad, for you have committed blasphemy against my name.
I what?
Yes, you just called the idea of a flying spaghetti monster creating the universe ridiculous.
I'm sorry, your noodliness. Can you forgive me, please?
Not only did you say it was ridiculous, but you also compared me to the ridiculous idea of the invisible pink unicorn and Russell's Teapot. You will now face the consequences of your lack of belief for that which there is no evidence.
No!